Midtown Fort Collins, starting to see some premium prices in Midtown.
Yep.
Couple 100,000. I mean, this house on 2500 Matthews, shout out to Eric Hansen for selling that one. 1.224, 2,100 square feet. That's about $400,000 more than a home has sold in Midtown, at least in South College Heights.
Yep.
And I'm starting to see that on a couple different neighborhoods, just blowing comparables out of the water. Probably wouldn't appraise, but you walk through that house, dialed in, the landscaping especially, but the quality of the finishes, definitely not your average flip, very high-end, mid-century, ensuite bath in every room. You know, just stuff you walk through and you really can notice the quality, and then it's like all of a sudden people don't really care. I mean, they care, and they didn't sell it immediately. It was on the market for 30 days, but you start to see some properties like that. There was one on Stewart in West Fort Collins that we offered on, went 100,000 over, and we, you know, that was about $200,000 higher than any home had sold in that neighborhood. So interesting to price those properties, but at the end of the day, even though you don't necessarily have a sale in that neighborhood proper, if you look at West Fort Collins and what you're getting for $900,000, and you look at that product backed up to open space, it's not hard to see why people paid that price. And a lot of people are waiving appraisals, so it's like, you know, it may or may not have appraised, and they bought it anyway.
That was a game changer. I mean, South College Heights is a really popular neighborhood. How many 3-bed, 1-baths have you walked through in South College Heights? They're cute. They're ranches. They're what grandma and grandpa bought in the 1950s. But to find one that has 3 bathrooms, all en suite, that's really rare. And people are going to pay a premium for that, because that house has incredible natural character. And then obviously it's been transformed, in keeping with the same tradition. Those are unicorns. And yeah, I'm not surprised somebody paid over 1.2 million for it. I've sold a few in there, more in the 500,000 to 600,000 range, that were borderline original in that neighborhood. So yeah, Eric Hansen, phenomenal job on that one.
Yep. Okay. Investment properties, not cash flowing right now. How many times do you have people come to you and say, Robert, I want to be in an investment property right now, and it's really hard to make it work?
Yeah, so I think you have to think about the long haul, right? It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. My first investment property that I purchased, I think I was cash flowing $34 a month on it. And I remember somebody saying, well, what's the point? You're not making any money. Well, I am, because I actually bought it 3 months ago, and I bought it at $400,000. And it's already worth $440,000. So yes, I'm making $34 a month, but I also just made $40,000. And that property, 6-7 years on now, is worth $600,000. Plus, I refinanced it. When I bought it, my interest rate was higher than I wanted, but at least I wasn't losing money. I refinanced. That property's making me $500 a month right now. And the renters pay my mortgage for me. So it's like they're putting extra money in the bank every month. So yes, if you're not cash flowing right away, that can feel a bit like a punch in the gut, but there's 3 other streams of revenue there. And we've not even talked about depreciation. So Larry Kendall, Ninja, the group, I remember going to his Wake Up Money class, and he said, if you can buy a property that can wash its face from day one, i.e. breaks even, then's a good time to buy a rental.
Yeah, I think now a lot of properties are putting 25% down. You know, you might be 500, 600, 700 a month underwater. So it's especially painful right now. I think a lot of people don't realize that, you know, if the market rate for a property that you're going to live in is 7%, if you're buying an investment property, you're going to be 7.5, 7.7. In some cases, you're like 3/4 of a point higher because it's an investment property. So it gets pretty painful, but you also have to think about the fact that, yes, you're getting appreciation. You're also getting paying down the mortgage every month. usually about $500 a month from year one. So even if you are negative, if you look at not even counting appreciation, just how much you're paying down the mortgage, you're probably more like break even. But a lot of people just aren't going to buy a property and be cash flow negative to the tune of $500 to $700 a month. And I don't blame them, but obviously, if we were cash flow positive, I think, the market would be in a very different place. And I think the fact that the pool of investors buying in Fort Collins is dried up considerably since rates went up as high as they do. Pretty much you only have cash investors right now.
Yeah, unless you're buying homes off market, it's hard to make it work.
Yep.
And typically in Fort Collins, the difference between a house that's in original condition versus flipped condition is the cost to do it.
Right.
So there's no meat on the bone for most flippers.
Yes.
Right? Potentially great for an owner occupant if you buy a house and you do work in it while you're living in it. But for flippers, it's tough in this town.
Flipping is really difficult. You're going to make the money when you buy the property. You can't expect to buy a property at market value, put $100,000 into it, and then sell it for $200,000 more. Usually you need to put about $200,000 into it, and it's going to be worth about the amount of money that you have into it. So the margins on flips are super thin. People need to, in a lot of cases, they need to find properties off the market.
Mm-hmm. It's a business.
It is.
Right. There are 3 or 4 well-known flippers in Fort Collins that have a system that they follow every single time, and they know what they're doing, and they do a good job.
Yep.
But I've definitely seen a couple of flips from first-time flippers recently. I mean, you got to start somewhere, but good realtors know what to look for in flips. And I've certainly seen a couple of oh my gosh, what were you thinking flips?
You see a lot of guys that are just really want to do a deal, and they'll just buy something and they don't buy it right. And then, they spend a year fixing it up and not making much money.
What's the biggest mistake you see on flips?
I think trying to do mop and shines where they're not adding a lot of value, or you see somebody put a lot of money into the interior and then the yard is a wasteland. And I think people really undervalue how much landscaping adds to a property. I mean, I've seen properties that I really felt like the landscaping added $250,000 of value.
Yeah.
And you don't realize how expensive landscaping is. I mean, especially when we start working in the $1 million space, $2 million space, you realize when you see some of these properties, why is that property worth $2 or $3 million? Well, a lot of times it's because they have a lot more than $2 or $3 million into that property. And landscaping is a big thing. It's very expensive to do landscaping well. But the people that do, those properties, that's why a lot of times the properties that I think people really go crazy over are often owner-occupied properties. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a flip. It's something that somebody has loved, and they weren't thinking, am I going to get a return on investment for this improvement? They were just thinking, I want to make the most beautiful house I can.
And I've seen plenty of flips that haven't done the landscaping because it is expensive, and they know the appraiser's not going to give value to that landscaping. But you walk into the backyard of a beautifully transformed home, and the backyard's just torn to pieces. I mean, it's usually a blank canvas, but you get back there and you're finding bottle caps and cigarette butts because it was a college house at some point. It got purchased off market, it got flipped, and the flipper didn't want to put $30,000 into the backyard. Leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
It does.
Biggest mistake, I think, flipping bi-levels.
Yeah.
That I've seen a couple recently, and they were in the 600s. 2 I can think of right away. And one was done well and one wasn't, but you don't flip a bi-level. It's like buying a Ford Fiesta and putting a $20,000 stereo system in it and bucket seats. It's still a Ford Fiesta, people. Do we have Ford Fiestas in America?
Hey, there's a lot to be said for bi-levels. There was a $900,000 bi-level that sold in Midtown. I can't remember the street, but I do remember thinking, oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah. But I think that's an anomaly.
That is a unicorn. We're going to have to look that up in a minute.
Yeah, I think it was Indian Hills.
Okay. I mean, again, neighborhood.
Yep.
But don't flip a bi-level in Brown's Farm. I saw one flipped in Parkwood, and I was like, oh, maybe it was Parkwood East.
Yeah.
And it sold eventually, but the flipper took a little bit of a hit on that.
Okay, competitive offer situations. A lot of agents, when they get multiple offers, they're calling buyers and saying, hey, you guys better bring your best offer. We have multiple offers. I've been very hesitant to kind of flex on multiple offer situations right now. I feel like buyers on a lot of times are like, if it's not competitive, call us. But now that you guys have an offer on the table, we're going to walk away.
Yeah.
So you got to be a little bit more calculated as far as what you're telling people. And I always encourage people, hey, we think we might get 2 or 3 offers, but you should still throw your hat in the ring. Those offers, you know how it goes. A lot of times they don't come through just because we're getting a lot of activity now. I try to get those offers to show up because the difference between 1 offer and 2 offers is obviously very different.
Yeah. Well, especially if you have escalation clauses.
Yeah.
Because an escalation clause doesn't kick in if you only have 1 offer. Have you been setting deadlines?
Yes.
Has that backfired at all?
I mean, I don't really set a deadline until I know for sure that we've got an offer. I do not come out of the gate setting a deadline with a listing.
Did you used to?
Yes.
Yeah. Back in 22, 23, I used to.
For sure.
And I have sellers that say to me, hey, we're going to set a deadline. And I know their house is beautiful and I know it's going to sell. But I think in today's market, when you put in the MLS, all offers must be in by 9 p.m. on Sunday. When you come with that out the gates, I think it scares people off right away.
It does.
Now, it didn't when interest rates were 3% because people were willing to pull out all the stops. But in today's market, so I had a house a couple of weeks ago, put it on the market. We had 12 showings the first day. Feedback was phenomenal. Got a hint from 3 realtors that were going to bring an offer. Did an open house. I had 39 groups through. So I called my client and I said, you know what? I think it's a good idea that we set a deadline offer. And my client said, gosh, Robert, based on those numbers, absolutely. Set the deadline for Monday. Guess how many offers I got?
1.
0. So I pulled that statement from the MLS.
Sure.
And we ended up actually getting a couple of offers on it, but you just don't know. Especially in this market where it's so unpredictable.
Yeah, pricing is really giving realtors fits. I mean, you talk, like when we price properties, a lot of times we're calling other agents that have listings in the neighborhood. And if they're sitting on the market and you call them and I've had sometimes people are almost in tears because they're so frustrated with the expectations they set with their clients and it not coming through. And then conversely, you have agents that told their clients, I think this is going to probably sit for a couple months, and then it gets it's a bidding war.
Yep.
So it's just really hard to gauge right now. And man, we're just agonizing over how to price property.
I had a listing in Midtown, priced it well. We had 7 offers the first weekend. I never saw that coming. Never saw it coming. Yeah, I have a cute listing in Windsor. And unbeknownst to me, the house next door came on the market the same weekend, crushed us. Yeah, they underpriced it. We were priced competitively, but because they underpriced it, it now makes us look overpriced. So pricing is a huge challenge right now. Got to be proactive, though. You have to be proactive. You can't be stagnant.
Yeah, and Windsor I'm hearing from agents that Windsor feels really slow. And I think we did the numbers and about half of the inventory in Windsor is new construction. And I think that just puts a lot of pressure on the resale market. Whereas in Fort Collins, about 10% of our inventory at any given time is new. So yeah, Windsor just feels a lot slower. But we did the numbers and Fort Collins is down about 7% compared to May of 2024.
Okay.
Median price. Now that's 1 month. So, but the fact that it came in May, a lot of times when we're looking at, March, April, May, it's just climbing a peak. And then we hit the summer, we hit July, and then it starts to to correct again. The fact that prices came down in May, I think, is pretty significant. Obviously, interest rates have been at 7% for duration, right? And you got all the drama with tariffs and the uncertainty around that. And I think it just seems like we probably needed a little bit of a correction. But for Fort Collins, 7% is big. That's one of the biggest price corrections we've had.
Our annual appreciations typically over the last 20 years about 4%, right? So yeah, we dropped 2 years worth of appreciation.
So that's basically about $40,000 off the median price. But again, it's 1 month, could bounce back next month, but coming into, the midsummer, end of summer is usually when we start to see stuff cool off. So, I think if you're a buyer, you got to be thinking, I know a lot of buyers think, well, if I buy now, is the market going to drop further? Should I wait? Should I try to time the market? And I think that's it's a hard game to play because, you always are wondering, should I buy? Should I buy? And at the end of the day, you got to get into the market at some point. I mean, if you try to time the market too much, you're never going to buy, right? You're always going to be waiting for the prices to correct to a point where you're satisfied. And Fort Collins is just not necessarily that kind of a market. I mean, the fact that we've got a 7% price correction here, that's about as much price drop as you will ever see, I think, in this market. And I didn't feel that on the ground. Like, I've been in a number of multiple offer situations. I've had listings sell very competitively in the last month. So I was really surprised to see those numbers. We're still at 100% of list price. So I really think it might be a function of there's a lot of agents in town coaching their clients to price listings lower than they otherwise would have. So maybe agents just aren't pushing price enough or as much as they used to.
So here's what I'm seeing right now. Other than people that have to sell, right? They have to sell because they're moving out of state. They have to sell because they're getting divorced. Somebody passed away. Maybe they're downsizing and they just can't handle the square footage. There's not a lot of I want to buyers right now because interest rates are 7%. When they were 3%, it was like kid in a candy store. So a lot of my buyers right now are saying to me, well, if we find the perfect house, we'll move. And I think that's the best philosophy. I showed 3 condos to a lovely couple yesterday, and the wife said to me, Robert, is it the right time to buy? And I told her, well, we don't tend to have a ton of inventory in Fort Collins anyhow. Interest rates are at 7%. So unless you absolutely love something, maybe hang off a little bit. If you like something, maybe we can keep an eye on it, see if they do a price drop, check in with a realtor in a week or so, see if they're getting flexible on price. But if you love it and it's priced well, get it now. Absolutely. Because you and I lived through 2021, 2022, when houses were selling, every house was selling $50,000, $70,000 above asking price. And a lovely young couple like who I took out yesterday, they wouldn't have been able to compete. Because if you're offering 50 to 70K over asking, the house isn't going to appraise, and that couple is expected to bring cash to the table to make up the difference. How many people can do that? So, right now, yes, the market's flattened out a little bit, but since there's not so much competition, and if you find something that just rocks your world, yes, jump in and get it. That's my advice.
Yeah. But if somebody does start shopping, a lot of times people will say, we're not in a hurry. We got to find the perfect place. But I always tell them, hey, if you guys are going to start to shop, I mean, it gets, you'll probably end up buying something, in my experience.
Yeah, it's hard not to get excited.
It's hard not to get excited. And,
yeah.
But you got to wait for the right thing. And, if you're looking for a good deal, you got to find a property that's been on the market a little while. I mean, it's really hard. A lot of times people find a house and they see it in the first 2 or 3 days. And they're like, this is really overpriced. Even if it is, it's really, a lot of times you got to wait a couple weeks before they're going to even think about trying to knock $20,000 or $40,000 off the list price. And a lot of times during that time, the house will sell. So I think most people are way more worried about finding a great house, the right house, than they are about trying to shave off 10 or 20 grand.
Well, at the end of the day as well, shaving 10 or 20 grand only saves you, sorry, at the end of the day, shaving off 10 or $20,000 only saves you $150, $200 on your mortgage each month. So,
yeah.
Something
you got to think about the 30-year fixed rate mortgage is an American thing. There's nothing else like it in the world. I mean, if you lived in Canada, you'd be refinancing every 5 or 10 years, depending on your loan product. I mean, the fact that you can basically lock in a rate and only lower that rate for 30 years, you can't do that. There's very few. I don't know of any other country in the world that has a 30-year fixed mortgage.
Can't do it in England. Doesn't work that way at all.
So
all adjustable.
It's a pretty sweet deal. Okay, if I was buying in Fort Collins and I wanted to negotiate like a cash buyer, I would consider removing my appraisal and my financing contingency in limited situations. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is they say, oh, I don't have cash, but you can structure your offer to be very similar to a cash offer. And a big part of that is your financing contingency. So most of our clients, they have an approval letter. The chances of them not getting approved for that mortgage are very, very low. They're buying, in a lot of cases, buying well within their range, but they still want to have a contingency that goes almost all the way to closing. And they want to keep that in place so that if they don't get the loan, they can back out right before closing.
It's terrifying for a seller.
It is.
If the average transaction takes 30 days to close, most of those loan transactions have that deadline 5 to 7 days before closing, whereby the buyer can terminate if their loan falls through. And we've tightened that up a little bit over the years. It has to be a very specific reason. The lender would likely have to write a letter.
And the big difference between a cash offer and a financed offer is there's just more contingencies. There's more options for the buyer to back out.
Right? Get outs. They're like trap doors out of a contract almost.
And the seller gets nothing. So a buyer can flake out and say, I didn't get a 3% interest rate and I want to walk away.
Yeah.
So you got to think about the seller's always thinking, I just want to do this once. I don't want to go back on the market. So
it's risk.
You
risk
can,
assessment.
And you can structure a contract to be very similar to a cash offer, but very few buyers do that. And the ones that do have a lot of leverage in the offers that they make. If they say, look, I'm going to do an inspection, but after that, if I don't buy the house, you get my earnest money. Now, realtors, a lot of times, they always want to protect their clients and write a contract that gives them all the ways to back out they possibly can. But I think the flip side of that is those offers don't look very strong to a home seller.
So like you say, a cash buyer wants to get through the inspection. That's it. They're done. They can't get out. I mean, they can terminate, but they lose their earnest money. For a loan buyer, through the inspection, and then you've got appraisal, then you've got loan approval. So it makes sense why a seller would say, well, I prefer the cash offer. It's less risk to me. So as a buyer, if you're going up against cash offers, you got to get creative. Now, not every loan buyer is going to do this, but I feel like it's our responsibility as their realtors to say, hey, here's what you're up against with a cash buyer, and here's what you can do. And it's up to you. I'm just going to tell you what you can do, and I'll share the risks with you. But if you have been employed by the same company for 10 years, you've got a great salary, good credit, you're not going to go out and buy a Ferrari or a speedboat between now and closing and crash that credit, you're going to be golden. And if you work with a really good lender, not one of these internet banks that advertise on the television, work with a good lender who's going to dig really deep into your finances. I've had a number of clients who've said, Robert, we're as good as gold. Take that financing contingency out, and we've won the house because of that.
It's good advice. All right, let's talk about being a good real estate negotiator, particularly on the sell side when you're helping somebody sell a house, understanding where your leverage is, right? One of the best parts about pricing a house properly, giving it a ton of marketing exposure, and getting more than one offer on a house. We had a deal last week where our buyer We went under contract with a buyer. Buyer sent us a big list of inspection items. The house inspected pretty well, but they wanted $8,000 off the price.
Okay.
So I said, called my clients. I said, I don't think we need to give them $8,000 for this inspection stuff. We, agreed that it was pretty minor. So we went back to them and said, no, we're not going to give you $8,000. So the other agent, who was an attorney, said, Ryan, we're going to be terminating this contract. Just boom, straight away said, we're terminating. I've been instructed to withdraw the offer. And I'm like, interesting. I said, well, you need to get me that paperwork very quickly. Get me the termination paperwork because we have another buyer who also made an offer and they were devastated that they didn't get this house. And so they are going to be thrilled, and I want to be able to call them as soon as humanly possible and give them the good news.
The balloon shop is going to close in 10 minutes, and I got to get down to this other buyer. I want to hear how this ends.
So she said, let me call you back.
Okay.
So she calls me back and she says, Ryan, is it okay if we still proceed with the contract? And I said, yeah, it is okay if you still proceed with the contract, and I will give her credit because most agents, I don't think they're not willing to sort of threaten to walk away.
Yeah.
And unless you threaten to walk away from a deal, you really don't have leverage. You hear a lot of agents that are like, is it okay would you be, okay if we ask for these repairs? They're very apologetic about what they ask for, and you're not going to get anything asking that way. But, you do have to understand what your leverage points are and know how to use them, and especially pricing a property correctly, getting multiple buyers.
Yep. You had leverage.
You had leverage.
Or leverage, as we say in England. Yeah. I mean, getting that backup offer is huge.
It's huge.
That's one of the reasons why, as realtors, we get the backup offers. We know it's never going to come through to fruition, but it gives us something like you did to say, well, we do have a backup offer, and those people were really upset. I'd love to give them a call and say, hey, you've got the house.
They're going to be thrilled. So that was a fun one.
I remember 7 or 8 years ago, I had a property in Stonehenge in Fort Collins, super desirable neighborhood over there with Parkview East. And the realtor came with a list of things she wanted done, or a credit for $10,000. And my clients saw that and they lost their minds. We're not giving them $10,000. I'm like, you don't want $10,000. I mean, if you want to give it to them, great. Let's just go through the list and get quotes. So we took 2 days, got quotes for every single item, and it came back as $3,500. And they were happy to do that because they were making a good profit on the house. So we went back to her and she said, yeah, that's great. We'll do it. So, sometimes you just got to take a little time, take a deep breath, work through the inspection objections, and you'll save your clients a ton of money and not have to fork out 10 grand to an overzealous realtor.
Well said.